guys, it's Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. It's an amazing time in which we're living, and maybe the season's hanging by a string, but it is still hanging, and the SEC is still fighting. I told you yesterday, I think there's a chance that those that want to save the season may get their result. We saw some conferences fall by the wayside yesterday, but that does not mean all hope is lost. The SEC, I think, not only does it have a plan in place, but it's got a way of articulating that plan that I think is winning some people over. So we will touch on all of that on today's show. It is Mike Griffith, a part of the proceedings there as well. It is a wild and crazy time. There's a very good chance something could happen while we're on the air here live on video, and if it does, well, that's what the show will be about. You just never know these days, but I'm glad to have you with us for it. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Harrah's Cherokee Resort. Find us online at caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, I told you on yesterday's show that I thought that those that were fighting to save college football might be winning. Believe it or not, I still feel that way. Even after the Big Ten fell by the wayside, postponing its season, they announced that yesterday. Pac-12, as followers tend to do, no leaders in the Pac-12, it would seem. You know, they go right there in the shadow of the Big Ten to get that done, too. They probably were going to do that anyway. We'll have maybe more on the Pac-12 before we're done. But even with the announcement of those two conferences folding their tents yesterday, first to surrender, honestly, the fight to save college football actually feels like it's on a little bit stronger, more stable ground today than it otherwise would have. And I'll tell you one more thing, too, before we kind of dive into all this. Believe it or not, I'm kind of having fun with this right now. Now, listen, if it ends with Georgia not playing a college football season, the fun is decidedly over at that point in time. I can promise you that there will be no fun if that's the case. But for now, I'm kind of enjoying this. I'm kind of, it's interesting to watch all the news come out. I think the SEC, the way it's portrayed itself the last few days, has been really good. I think it's been kind of cool to see the ACC and the Big 12 kind of fall in line with some of the stuff that the SEC is saying. College football needs leadership. I think the market drives that leadership. The SEC clearly wants to own the market and therefore, by proxy, kind of becomes college football's leader. I just think all that's really good. And with that in mind, let me talk about college football on the field for a moment. Because there's this thought out there that, and you've already probably heard some of this on social media, well, listen, there's no national champion this year. If you've got no Big Ten, if you've got no Pac-12, you can't have a national championship. You're missing two of your Power 5 conferences. Good luck to the teams that try to play and get this done, but don't think of this as a legitimate season because, 40% of the Power 5 plans on not playing this fall. Good luck with all of that. Let me tell you right now, that is totally patently absurd. You do not need the Big Ten for a legitimate national champion. You don't need the Pac-12 for a legitimate national champion for reasons that people on this show already know. The Pac-12 and the Big Ten aren't much of a part of the national championship conversation in most years anyway. Yes, Ohio State did win the first college football playoff back in 2014, but that starts to feel like kind of a long time ago by now. Since then, Ohio State's lost 31-0 to Clemson. What was it, 2016, I think that happened? Lost to Clemson in the college football playoff a year ago. The idea that there's no legitimacy to the national championship without Ohio State ignores the fact that Ohio State is face planted in the college football playoff a couple of times over the course of the last few years. And don't even get me started on the Pac-12, which in most years really isn't even a part of the conversation to qualify for the college football playoff. They haven't been in the tournament since, 2016 when Washington got it handed to them in a game against Alabama, in which Alabama kind of wasn't even trying. Crimson Tide fans wanted to fire Lane Kiffin after the game, and Alabama coasted to an easy win over the Huskies, proving just how illegitimate Washington was as a playoff team anyway. Pac-12 hasn't won a playoff game since Marcus Mariota was in college, going back to also the first year of the college football playoff in 2014. The idea that you can't have a national champion unless you have, the Big Ten, the Pac-12, a part of that conversation is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Clearly, the Pac-12 doesn't value this sport at the same rate everyone else does. I've got, no problem with them not even being a part of this upcoming season. The Big Ten, by comparison, I do feel a little sorry for him. We'll kind of get more into that maybe in a little bit of a moment. There were a lot of coaches who fought hard to save that season. There were a lot of players who are devastated, rightly so, today about not having the chance to play this upcoming season. I've actually got some sympathy for some of the figures in the Big Ten at the coaching level, at the player level. I think they were done a massive disservice by the folks affiliated with their universities at like the high administrative president's level. But ultimately, even if I have some sympathy for them and the fact they don't get to play this year, the fact that they're not playing is not going to hold up the rest of college football potentially towards having a season. And if you've got a Big 12, an ACC, and an SEC, you can absolutely have a national champion that is absolutely going to be viewed as legitimate by the lion's share of the college football fans, and that is just the fact on that. Now, honesty compels me to admit that while you may have a legitimate national champion, there is a chance you don't have a college football playoff. And how do you determine a national champion? If you don't have a playoff, I don't really know. There's a lot about the next couple of months that none of us can know right now, but pretty clearly the absence of the Big Ten, the absence of the Pac-12, I do think calls the college football playoff into question, because the current playoff agreement involves these leagues. And this is always kind of a tenuous relationship as it is. Believe it or not, as asinine as this sounds, there are going to be plenty of figures in these conferences, Pac-12, Big Ten, that if the playoff tried to occur without them, those conferences are still going to want their share of the money because of the contract they have. Even if they're not contributing teams into the race this year, that's going to be frustrating. In fact, let me read you a quote here from Bill Hancock, the executive director of the college football playoff, who was quoted by Sports Illustrated on, hey, what does it mean for the playoff if there's no Pac-12, if there's no Big Ten? And Hancock says it's too soon to say. We are awaiting guidance from the College Football Playoff Board and Management Committee. That's Bill Hancock via Sports Illustrated on that. And the too soon to say part of that is a stark contrast to what Hancock, the executive director of the College Football Playoff, has said in the past. In the past, when asked about the playoff, if you could have one in a year when you weren't sure you'd have fans in the stands, when you weren't sure how many games would be played, Hancock has had a very, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, optimistic stance in the past, saying, listen, whatever these conferences decide to do as a college football playoff, we'll be ready to navigate those waters when it comes along. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said, a very optimistic tone of the playoff will be ready to respond to whatever college football looks like. But on the heels of a couple of conferences not playing, I detect a little bit of a difference in the way that Hancock is talking about that. So to kind of recap this part of the discussion, you don't need Big Ten for a legitimate national championship because in the last couple of decades, Big Ten's not winning very many of those anyway. You certainly don't need Pac-12 for that because, the great era of the Pac-12 is now many years in the rearview mirror. Frankly, there's, it's a rare thing to even have a Pac-12 team as a contender for a spot in the college football playoff. The absence of these two conferences doesn't reduce the legitimacy of the eventual national champion if the Big 12, the ACC, and the SEC do play. But those conferences' absence could cause the college football playoff to have to kind of rethink itself a little bit. And I would say there's a chance that you don't have a playoff, even if you have a season, just because once the fight over money begins, that has a tendency to turn kind of nasty on that. Now, let me talk about something completely different just for a moment, because I thought the SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey had a very good day yesterday. And, obviously on this show, we've made no bones about the fact that we believe the college football season can be played in a health and safety way, or I should say a healthy and safe way. And we don't believe that because we're football at all costs. In fact, there's a reason that people like me aren't in charge of all this kind of stuff. And this is one thing I've said over and over again, that there's a caricature of the SEC, that it's obviously this football-crazed region of the country, and that is true. But the people who make the most important decisions for this league, in a situation like this, the conference commissioner, the league's athletic directors, the league's university presidents, the sports science experts on the various campuses who inform a lot of this kind of stuff, these are not people who paint their faces on college football Saturdays, who have the shakers in the one hand, the red Solo cup in the other, and they're tailgating all day long and just, living it up as the life of fan. The fans who do that are the lifeblood of this league, but ultimately at the top of the food chain, you have serious, smart people who have worked on their reputation over the course of decades. They're not looking to throw this away at the short-term benefit of having a season if the conditions for having that season are dangerous. So if college football happens this year, it's not going to happen because blowhard like me that speaks into a microphone says it should. It's going to happen because people like Ron Corson, Georgia's trainer and a sports science expert, says that it could, and other folks around the SEC there in that regard. And it's nice to see the SEC Commissioner, Greg Sankey, kind of stepping up and making an argument for why their experts, those people who are taking this just as seriously, and in some cases maybe more seriously than other folks around college football, have been doing this now for a while too, by the way, going back months and months and months. It's nice to hear Sankey stepping up and speaking on their behalf. Let me give you a quick example of this from a statement Sankey made yesterday on the heels of the Big Ten and the Pac-12's decision to postpone. Sankey says, I look forward to learning more about the factors that led the Big Ten, the Pac-12 leadership to take these actions today. I remain comfortable with the thorough and deliberate approach the SEC and our 14 members are taking to support a healthy environment for student athletes. We continue to further refine our policies and protocols, Greg Sankey goes on to say. Do we have the rest of that? He says, for a safe return to sports as we monitor developments around COVID-19 and a continued effort to support, educate, and care for our student athletes every single day. Here's the thing I think people are going to be very surprised about. The more that comes out on this, I think a lot of folks assume that the SEC, as I said before, is just a bunch of, rogue football at all costs folks who are looking for a way to play football and explain why later. I think people are going to be very surprised. Like the heart condition myocarditis that we've been talking about the last couple of days, I think people are going to be very surprised to learn how long that has been on the radar of many folks around the SEC. I'm not smart enough to tell you if the coronavirus can be navigated, the potential ill effects that come because of the coronavirus, such as the heart condition myocarditis. I'm not smart enough to tell you if those obstacles can be overcome to play a season. But if people within the SEC believe that it can, those are experts that I would trust. The mantra this entire time has been trust the experts. Well, the SEC has experts here, and it says that it wants to trust them. And Greg Sankey calling out the Big Ten, calling out the Pac-12 to say, whatever reason you have for why you chose to cancel the season, show us your work. Put that out there. Make it public. Let us know what you have. I think it's a pretty strong statement for Greg Sankey, and it's another example of why the momentum is growing for the football season to occur in a healthy and safe way. And if the Big Ten doesn't want to be a part of it, then Godspeed. If the Pac-12 doesn't want to be a part of it, we probably wouldn't have noticed had you played anyway. But if the SEC wants to, and the ACC thinks it can, and the Big 12 wants to join them, we're going to still have something that feels an awful lot like college football this year. And if it's just those three leagues, then the more fun for us to enjoy at the expense of the rest of the sport. This is certainly an interesting time. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, celebrating the fact that Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort is back open again. Really fun news. I'll tell you more about that coming up in just a moment. But it's also fun to have you with us on today's show, no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, on Twitter. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. I spent some time on the morning show there this morning. I do that every Wednesday. That's always a good way to start my day. For those of you that listen on the radio there, I'm really glad to be in a relationship with you from that sense. Also, podcast form, the Apple Player, the Google Player, the world-famous DawgNation.com. Yeah, I know the podcast didn't get posted to DawgNation.com yesterday in the midst of the craziness of all the news that was breaking, but we'll make sure we get that up on the site, and we apologize. We try to stay really consistent with that. We did miss that yesterday, so we'll make that up to you there at the world-famous DawgNation.com for those of you that depend on that. My apologies. By the way, speaking of Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, as I said before, they are back open again. And like so many smart companies right now, finding a way to take care of their people in a healthy and safe way. We've been talking about this when it comes to college football. You'll see the same thing about Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort there as well. They've reduced the capacity in the hotels. They've got the room space to be able to do that. Also, restaurants, casinos, kind of very much the same way. Masks, of course. But listen, the same enjoyable experience, the spa, the pool, the casino gaming floor, the restaurants, all that. It's all there for you still as well, just like always. It's an incredibly fun getaway. Really just a couple-hour drive here from Atlanta. Very short, very easy to get to. Also, on Fridays right now this month, they got a really fun thing going on. It's called Friday Night Frenzy. It's a $20,000 cash prize to be shared. It's from 5 to 8 p.m. It's incredibly fun. Just an example of one of the ways in which Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort looks forward to taking care of its customers, taking care of its visitors. It's a fun getaway. Glad to have the gaming floor back open again. Hope you'll check that out. I'm watching the video right now. It's so beautiful to see this kind of nestled there in the mountains of North Carolina. I am dying to get back up there again soon. I'm sure many of you feel the same way. So Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee for more on this. Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee. That'll get you in touch with my friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. I'm going to get Mike Griffith coming up in really just about a minute or so here. But I do want to mention something I wrote at DawgNation.com yesterday. I think stories are always made more powerful when you're able to put a face on that story. And I talked yesterday at DawgNation.com where I wrote about Justin Fields. And listen, Justin Fields' departure from Georgia is always going to be somewhat controversial because he was a five-star quarterback who left and went to a high-profile program like Ohio State. There's some hurt feelings left over on that. I don't disregard that. But Fields is someone that I'm still a fan of. And when you see the way in which Fields, who just wanted to play football, right, didn't think he was playing enough here in 2018, and now apparently won't be playing anywhere in 2020, it's just disappointing, right, if you're Justin Fields, and I have some sympathy for him on that. I wrote about that yesterday at DawgNation.com. I was glad to hear so many of you, and by the way, Fields also kind of weighed in on Twitter about this himself, saying, the SMH, shaking my head stuff, he put that out there. He's obviously bothered by all of this. He'd also been, very outspoken in terms of, trying to fight for the hashtag we want to play. He wanted to be a part of that, and, it's guys like that who suffer the most when the Big Ten makes the decision to postpone its season. I was also thankful to hear so many of you mention to me of, hey, BA, don't forget about Luke Ford, former Georgia tight end who transferred to Illinois, who got a raw deal from the NCAA in terms of not being granted immediate eligibility, and, now gets a raw deal from the Big Ten in terms of the fact that the school that he transferred to, Illinois, won't be playing college football this fall. And, there's a lot of sympathy to go around, and multiple guys who have connections to Georgia who are part of this. It's one of the reasons why I think the Big Ten's reasoning for postponing their season, you might as well call it a cancellation, just given the fact that the spring season's so up in the air. They need to come out and be more forthright about what led them to make that decision, because a lot of lives have been negatively impacted. If they had a good reason, they need to make it public. If not, it is not a good look for the Big Ten or the Pac-12 right now. Good to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. Let's do more of this. Everything that's out there in the current situation for Georgia, the SEC playing college football this fall. Let's talk to Mike Griffith about that.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I'm going to bring in Mike Griffith, who's been doing a great job covering all of this for DawgNation.com over the last couple of days. And, Mike, what we know now and what I've talked about on the show already is that the Big Ten is postponing for now. And the Pac-12 is joining them in doing that. And there was some thought yesterday of, well, maybe the Big 12 kind of becomes the next domino to topple, and they'll postpone their season, and the writing could be on the wall for all of the rest of college football at that point in time. Big 12 held strong last night, and it appears for now they are content to keep moving forward with the attempt to have a season, which obviously gives more cover to the ACC and allows the SEC, I believe, to continue to lead the way on this from both a health and safety standpoint and also just a kind of a market and messaging standpoint. Where do you view this as where it stands right now in relationship to everything we've learned over the last 24 hours? Hard for people to follow. Where is your mind on all of this at the moment?
Well, it's, everything comes with measured risks. And, you've got some conferences that have decided to take those measured risks at this time, for their student athletes, and some conferences that decided it wasn't worth it to take those measured risks for their student athletes. And, you say time will tell, BA, but, you can't look back. All you can do is make decisions with the information that you have in front of you as best as you can. Everybody's trying to do the right thing. The Big Ten and the Pac-12, they're not trying to do the wrong thing here. They're doing what they believe is best based on their information. And, the SEC and the ACC and the Big 12, they've been presented their information, and they have a little bit different mindset about it. And you can talk about whether it's financially driven or, I think it comes down to the student athletes. I think the student athlete movement made a difference. I think Trevor Lawrence made a difference. I think his legacy, even though he's already got a national championship, he might have another one by the end of this year. Who knows? Looks like he's going to be a great NFL quarterback. But his legacy might just be saving the college football season, because I believe that college football player movement, really shifted the minds of a lot of these presidents, and that were in tune with their student athletes and their fan base.
Yeah, you may be right about that. Something else that you said a moment ago that I think is also probably true as well is, even though I take my shots at the Big Ten, the Pac-12, and I don't agree, I don't think I agree with the decision they made yesterday, I think it is important to know they're not bad people. They're not, intentionally trying to sabotage the season. I think you're right about that. However, Mike, the one thing I will add to this discussion, though, is that one of the things that I liked about yesterday is while there's obviously a burden of proof to establish why you think you can play, and I think that Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, is trying to meet that standard with some of his public remarks, it seems there's also a growing burden of proof requirement to explain why you're not playing. Because, you mentioned what Trevor Lawrence stepped up and said. We've also seen a lot of parents of Big Ten players prior to the postponement when they thought it was coming. They've been very vocal in all of this. Justin Fields' original tweet about too much work has been put in. There were a lot of Big Ten players saying some similar things to what Lawrence said. And one of the ways in which I like the way the conversation has evolved since then is there are people asking the Big Ten, including Greg Sankey himself yesterday, to say, hey, be public, be specific about why it was you chose to cancel the season or postpone the season, I guess they would say. Tell us what this was about. Tell us what you know. Tell us why you have taken all these student athletes who obviously have been waiting for this fall to play football. Give us more details about why you're taking that from them. And if you've got a good reason, then we'll all know that. But just sort of cryptic language in and of itself doesn't seem like it's going to be enough right now. And frankly, to the degree to which the conversation has evolved in that direction, Mike, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, well, that's a long way of saying you got to decide if it's worth the risk. And, everybody has a different risk temperament, right? And again, the Big Ten and the Pac-12, they're academically driven. I know that, but I think schools in the SEC are too. And I think it just comes down to culture. I really do. I think it comes down to the culture and the environment that you're in. I mean, look, it's hokey, but it's true. I mean, it does mean more in the SEC. I'm a Michigan transplant. Why did I seek out the SEC for my career? Why did I move down here in 1993 to cover the SEC? Because there was a passion about it, because it was interwoven in the culture, and it meant more to the fans. And you've got to know your audience. You've got to know your audience. And the SEC and the Big 12 and the ACC know their audience. And so it makes that risk easier to take when people understand, because here's what nobody talks about. It keeps getting lost, and I want to scream it out on the top of the roof. Nobody's talking about the unintended consequences. Now that football's been taken away, now what for those athletes in the Pac-12 and the Big Ten? Are they really going to be safer if they opt out and start training on their own and disperse to cities? I don't think so. I think the safest play, and I'm getting ready to publish this story here in a few minutes about, the legitimacy of, this season. I think you've got 3 of 5 conferences still playing, and if you look at the playoffs, the Pac-12 and the Big Ten have hardly made a dent. But 2, the simple fact that these schools are offering these student athletes, I think, the safest environment on the planet. Look, they're surrounded by kids that are tested 3 times a week. They've got medical personnel 24/7 on hand. They've got biometric measurements on their body, measuring their heart rate with every step they take when they do strenuous activities out in the sun and true practice. I mean, is there a safer place that an athlete could be than on a college campus right now? I would say probably not. They're probably safer than the guy walking down the street or jogging next to the road.
Well, I'm not going to say one way or another what's safe and what's not, but if other people who are smarter than me say it's safe, I'm probably going to trust them. And along those lines, Mike, we heard yesterday reports, I think it was Barry Alvarez, the Wisconsin athletic director who went on the record about this, that the Big Ten's going to maintain a 20-hour work week, which is essentially the same thing as a regular practice schedule as it is. The way it's been described by some media folks around the Big Ten is they're going to do everything this year but play games on Saturday. And I'm sorry, I don't know how that's supposed to make players safer, that if you're still, training, if you're still around your program, if you're still expected to go to class, the majority of the Big Ten schools will be doing on-campus instruction. Some of the institutions even bragging about that, the fact they're bringing students back to campus. If you're still asked to do all this kind of stuff, and the only thing you're not doing is playing a game on Saturday, for the life of me, as I said before, I'm not all that smart, but how in the world does that make players safer if they're going to be asked to do everything this fall but play the games on Saturday?
They're actually less safe, and here's why. Because they've only got 20 hours a week over there. Where are they going to be those other 20 or 30 hours a week? I'll tell you where they're going to be. They're going to be circulating, and they're going to be hanging out with other students. Whereas just by the very nature of a student-athlete schedule during football season, they're pretty much quarantined from the world for 95% of their time. They don't have much time outside their football building, outside their tutorial center, outside the training room, outside the meeting room, outside the time with the roommate who's on the football team who's also been tested. I mean, that's what I'm saying. You're safer being in that environment because because it's funny, and Greg Sankey pointed this out earlier this summer. You hear so much about, the students want more downtime, they need more time away. Now they're going, hey, it's a good thing you don't have more downtime. It's a good thing you don't have more time away because, as Sankey said yesterday, they're in a quasi-bubble already, just by the very nature of the student-athlete schedule. So I think you make a good point, B.A. I looked at that, and I just kind of said, what in the heck? Now the Pac-12 has canceled all their sports, all their practices through December 31st. Think about those basketball programs out there, right?
Yeah.
But the Big Ten allowing the partial training, I mean, to me, I don't see where, and that's for the ones that stick around. The reason let's be clear about the reason they're doing that. They're doing that to keep kids from transferring out. I don't think they're doing that in the interest of student athletes. I think they're doing that to keep kids engaged in their program.
Well,
if they shut it down completely, they're leaving.
You may be right about that. Let me make a prediction, though. And listen, I'm not a medical expert, but I feel like I certainly study human behavior. If you're asking these kids on a long-term basis to continue with what kind of feels almost like a preseason camp, right? Weight room stuff, training stuff, classroom stuff. It's one thing to do that in like July and August because you're heading towards a specific date where the season will be played. That's been the story of college football for, going back decades and decades and decades. But when you're asking players to do that, when they head towards a moving target of maybe we'll play this spring, maybe it's next fall, we don't really know, we're not going to say much about that for the specific right now. This is just human nature. Like mental fatigue is a thing. And there are going to be some Big Ten players. We may never hear about these players, but they're going to suffer from mental fatigue through all of this. Almost some of them are going to lose touch with their classroom. Almost some of them are going to lose touch with their training regimen. You just can't go on at full speed academic athletic performance when you don't really know what it is that you are preparing for because you don't know when it is you're going to get a chance to play your sport again. And that is, I think, part of the unintended consequence on this. The idea that players are going to be easy to manage, easy to lead when you don't have a specific target date you're pointing towards, I just think that's going to grow to be a largely untenable situation for a lot of Big Ten programs. We may never hear about that, but I suspect that's what's coming.
Well, you better have great team chemistry. I just look at our DawgNation team and the way we've worked this summer and the fact you've done all these shows. And, typically this time of year, I put a post up, the other day. We were talking to Jake Fromm a year ago over in the football building. We were talking about football. We were talking about, when the first game was going to be, and we've, I think anybody can associate with it. I think a lot of fans can certainly associate with that. I mean, we're all looking forward to football season, and I think it's been hard on everybody to have the sports taken away because that's something that we all look forward to. You work the week, and it's all aimed toward that game. I know for me, covering a team, I love the daily coverage, but man, when you walk into Sanford Stadium, on that game day, and all the fans are there, the electricity, and the suspense of what's going to happen today, who's going to be the star. I mean, I think we all are geared toward that. So I think your point's right, and I think part of the reason, because at first when you saw the American Athletic Conference, the Conference USA, and the Sun Belt, they're moving forward, even though they only have 4 or 6 games, and you go, geez, how are they doing that without their bye game? Well, I think a lot of these athletes are going to cash out. And I think that the Conference USA, the Sun Belt, the American Athletic Conference, these schools can make a real move now. I think they're going to get some great athletes out of this, and I think it's going to change recruiting, and this would obviously be something for folks to watch on Jeff Sentel's program tonight on the same channel at 7 o'clock before the Hedges. I think this is going to change the dynamics of recruiting because, as you just said, there's going to be some questions about, well, how committed is the Big Ten and Pac-12 to their programs? Now, you can say it's safety, but then again, the hypocrisy of allowing students on campus kind of screams out at you and say, now, wait a minute, how can you let students on campus but not let your football programs or your sports programs move forward? That seems somewhat hypocritical in nature. So I think you make a good point there, Brandon.
I'll try to do two subjects before we let you go here. I think it's important to note that when it comes to the SEC, Greg Sankey has spoken on the record. Ron Corson, who's obviously a part of the UGA staff, but also a part of the advisors who are helping point the SEC in the right direction, he has recently been on the record. Mike, I think one of the things that the SEC gets unfairly maligned for is that it's somehow this football at all costs league. Football, regardless of the expense, the cost, the potential for tragedy, that the SEC doesn't care about any of that. It just wants to play football. I'm really proud of the way this league has been on the record and seemingly at the forefront of the health and safety conversation. Not just the hey, we got to have football because of the economy, but here's how you have football. Here's what our plan is. I'm actually pretty impressed with the SEC at this moment in time, and if those folks say it's healthy, I'm inclined to believe them.
Yeah, I just posted a story on that. Zamir White had a tweet yesterday, and Greg McGarity said it best. He's the athletic director. He said it's our responsibility to give kids an opportunity, but we have to find a way to do it safe. I liked what he said, that it's their responsibility. That's right. When these kids sign these scholarship papers, you do have a responsibility to deliver on that promise that your institution is going to do everything it can to help them realize and pursue their dreams. And if they make the adult decision, which, when you're 18, you can do that. I raised my hand. I served in the military. When I was 18, nobody had to sign for me. I signed up for it, proud that I did. These kids at 18, 19, 20, they're adults now. They get to make their own decisions. It's up to Georgia to educate them on the risks that they're taking, to educate them on the proper protocols to minimize those risks. But the thing that the critics, they don't want to admit is COVID-19 existed before football. It's going to exist during football. It's going to exist after football. And playing football, I don't believe, raises the dangers of COVID-19. Does contact? Sure it does. But if you're having contact with 100% other people around you that have also been tested and monitored, not so much. Certainly not as much as you get walking down the street or sitting in a busy restaurant.
Well, Mike, we appreciate you being here. I also had a good time with you last night as a part of our Inside the Huddle event. We've got another one of those coming up tonight for those who are lucky enough to be a part of it. So you and I will speak again this evening, not in a public forum, but in a private forum for some of our folks who got signed up for that. So I'm enjoying the chance to do that. I thought last night was a ton of fun. I mean, really, the kinds of things that you can't recreate. And so tonight should be even better and even more fun. Can't wait to be with you here this evening as a part of Inside the Huddle.
Look forward to it, B.A. Thanks, man.
All right, good stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, I want to talk about some of what Mike brought to mind there here in a moment as we transition our SEC Through. Before that, let me give a quick shout out to the Atlanta Braves, doing everything they can to navigate the challenges. And if you're Brian Snicker, the Braves manager, you've obviously dealt with some challenges this year. No Ronald Acuna in the lineup last night against the New York Yankees. Obviously, the starting pitching has presented some issues, but the Braves keep fighting, they keep clawing, and they keep continuing to be incredibly entertaining in this shortened season, only a 60-game regular season. You're playing the Yankees teams like that a little bit more than you typically would. You're playing your National League East rivals a lot. There are no duds on this schedule for the Braves this year. It's nothing but teams you know about, care about, in most cases, if you're a Braves fan, dislike. It's been a fun campaign thus far. The fun's only going to ratchet up as you head towards the stretch run here, and with the 60-game regular season schedule, it's all basically a stretch run. So do me a favor, check out Braves.com/schedule. It's one of those things where, and I'm consider myself a fairly plugged-in sports fan, even I find myself having to spend a lot more time looking at the schedule, seeing who the Braves are playing, where are they tonight, what's going on, just because this entire year is just a little bit weird, designated hitter, new rules for extra innings, things like that. I do find myself in a kind of check in on stuff like that a little more frequently. So to stay up to date on everything going on there, Braves.com/schedule. That's a good way to be able to do that. Okay, I'm going to do some SEC Through stuff, but I also want to comment on a couple of things that are brought to mind on the basis of what Mike said. First of all, on the topic of the Big Ten for a moment. And I guess what has been reported as, I think Barry Alvarez, the Wisconsin athletic director, to the extent that he's in the know on this, that the 20-hour work weeks will be maintained. And I said, listen, I'd worry about some mental fatigue that could lead to some attrition, that, players may just not be paying quite as much attention in class, may not be as, listen, homesickness is a huge factor for college football anyway. I mean, these players are battling homesickness a lot as it is. That homesickness is going to kick in even more when you don't really know what it is that you're working and training for. It's just a fact of life. That mental fatigue kind of takes over. And Mike's response a moment ago, and this is a good thing to say, he said, well, you better hope you have really good, strong team chemistry to kind of hold your team together through all of this. But here's what my point would be. If you're not playing games, are you really a team? I mean, think about this for a moment. These are players who are very used to doing individual workouts, right? They're personal coaches, the stuff they're doing during the spring and the summer. They're very used to doing individual workouts. Now, they may do them in groups, but these are, for the most part, individual workouts designed to get them better. It's almost like with no games to play, how do you really even consider yourself a college football team? We may never see or hear about as much of this because it's kind of a weird thing to report on, but the challenge awaiting the Big Ten trying to hold its programs together, its younger players who aren't draft eligible, holding their focus, keeping their intensity up, both in the classroom and in the training facilities, also keeping them safe from COVID, by the way. It's one thing to say, hey, live a boring life so you can play a college football season. It's another thing to say, don't go to parties, don't interact with girls, don't do that kind of stuff in the hopes that you might be able to play football like 6 months from now. Good luck on that if you're the Big Ten. What a mess they have created for themselves here. And if they've got good reasons for why they did it, they need to be very, very, very specific and articulate about what those are, on the record, experts quoted, data announced. I believe that's really important and true. Now, the other thing I wanted to say about college football moving on, if it does in the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12, there's one thing I want to make sure that you know that you're not going to hear me say. Here's what you're not going to hear me say. If the season gets played, I'm saying this now, so you'll know. If the season gets played, and if something bad happens, let's say a player gets really, really sick, the one thing that I'm not going to say at that time is, well, listen, there's risk associated with life, and these players all said they wanted to play. They knew the risk going into that. As much as I want the college football season to occur, and I do, and as much as I say if people smarter than me say the season can take place, I will trust them. The standard of, listen, you knew the risk going in, everybody signed up for the same thing here, that standard's not going to quite be high enough for me. I do think that, to sound sort of corny and hokey, I almost think we have a bigger obligation to our fellow man than that, than just to say, listen, you knew there was a risk, hate it for you. I just think the obligation is just a little bit higher than that. That it's more than just allowing players to opt in and say, hey, you guys are adults, you could fight in a war, you're on your own in college football. I think there's a lot more to that conversation than that. I think it's about establishing a reasonable standard of we think we can keep players' health and safety. By the way, reasonable is not 100% guarantee. None of us have 100% guarantee with anything. But a reasonable standard of we think we can keep players healthy and safe. That's what this kind of comes down to, which means understanding, as we've been saying a lot over the last little bit, about whether it be the heart condition that's known as myocarditis or some of the other potential offshoots that come from a viral disease, which the coronavirus obviously is. Is there a reasonable chance that you can combat against this, that you can observe the negative consequences that can emerge from a virus? That's what this is about. This is not about sort of the kind of, cold-hearted, as long as you sign that waiver, you can go out there and be on this football field, and whatever happens after that's, your own personal responsibility. I believe the standard of care that universities ought to have for the players is a little bit higher than that, and frankly, I think it's probably a lot higher than that. And so, from that standpoint, that's one thing you will not hear me say. This has never been football at all costs for me. Football at the expense of human life is an awful, awful trade-off, and that's certainly that, that way here as well. All right, so, okay, we do have some breaking news here, and if your radio podcast, it's just one of those times in which some of the stuff is going to be later when you get it, but Connor Riley, our on-site producer here, doing a great job. So Brett McMurphy's got some details in the Big 12 schedule. So let's read this. Brett McMurphy from Stadium. On video, you obviously see this, and a great job by Connor getting this up here. So the Big 12 games are going to begin now on September the 26th. The title game is going to take place on December the 12th, that's the week earlier than the SEC. So that's the same start date as the SEC with a title game that comes a week earlier than the SEC schedule. Yeah. The start of the season can be delayed until October the 10th and end December the 12th with a title game December 19th, so they could eventually land on the same date the SEC expects to be. So here's what will kick it off for the Big 12, according to Brett McMurphy from Stadium, who has been very plugged in. Kansas at Baylor, Texas at Texas Tech, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Oklahoma. No favors for the Sooners there week 1 against a Wildcats team that took them to the wire a year ago. And then Iowa State, TCU. And then, okay, so this is interesting for the crowd that, wonders about, Georgia and Florida remaining in Jacksonville even in a year in which fans will either be greatly reduced or non-existent. Oklahoma, Texas is still in Dallas on October the 10th. And what makes that interesting is the Texas State Fair has been canceled. So Oklahoma, Texas will take place in Dallas on the same date as always, but the Texas State Fair itself has been canceled. So I think this is a pretty bold move on the part of the Big 12. In the light of everybody else, or I should say, two other Power 5 leagues, the Pac-12 and the Big 10 postponing their season, it's a sizable flex on the part of the Big 12 to say, here's our schedule. And this goes back to what the SEC has done here. And listen, when it comes, I'm obviously an SEC homer. I don't pretend to be, anything other than that. But when it comes to Greg Sankey, I have not always loved everything that Greg Sankey has done in his time as SEC commissioner. Frankly, I think that he has at times been a poor comparison to his predecessor, Mike Sly. But he has been, tough as shoe leather on all of this when it comes to the coronavirus. Very smart and savvy, the best that I can tell. And the fact that the Big 12 announces a schedule that closely, from date standpoint, that closely mirrors what the SEC is planning on doing. I've said this before, I'll say it again. One of the very sneaky smart things that the SEC did was move its schedule to late September in terms of how it started, because it gave itself a lot more cover. And, I hate to play the PR game on all this, but the one thing that everyone's starting to pay attention to, something we've been talking about on this show now kind of for a while, is the hypocrisy of school being back in session, students on campus, with college football getting the scrutiny for trying to have a season. We've always felt like there was something kind of gross, but the way that colleges were able to, with, is it impunity, with total, I guess let's say immunity from criticism, total immunity from criticism, bring students back on campus, while college football was raked over the coals for trying to have a season. By starting on September 26th, you let the academic process play out for a couple of weeks before you begin your games. Theoretically, you let the NFL begin before you begin your games. Even though you kind of, put a crunch with only 2 off weeks to kind of get it done once you start, the delay gives a lot of life a chance to unfold before you kick off. I think that was a very sneaky, smart thing that the SEC did, and it's kind of interesting to see the Big 12 kind of falling in line with some of this kind of stuff. And I guess on the basis of what we just heard there, does that mean the Week 0 games are now canceled for the Big 12? So there are no Week 0 games, because that was the one thing that did, at least according to Brett McMurphy from Stadium, that was the one thing that was going to make the Big 12 different than the other Power 5 leagues. Was it was the only one that was going to have any, I shouldn't say the only one, because I guess there's still a chance the ACC has some of these types of games. But the Big 12 was going to play some of the, what we think of as kind of like FCS Group of 5 bye games. SEC was not going to do that. And it looks like now, according to Brett McMurphy from Stadium, that's not going to be the case either. So we have a Big 12 schedule coming out right here during our show. By the way, I want to share this on the way out the door. We've seen a lot of hashtag we want to play stuff from players. Zamir White, the Georgia running back, took that up a notch. He dropped an edit. It was more than just the hashtag. He actually went out there and had a little bit of a social media edit. I believe the Alabama quarterback Mac Jones also had an edit too. So good job on the social media front here from Zamir White, who says, "We've worked too hard not to be able to take the field this fall. I trust the plan that our leadership has to keep us safe on the field and off. Our team is focused and ready to play." I think the SEC has the opportunity here to lean on its plan, because the SEC has been specific about what that plan is. So good stuff about Zamir White. From Zamir White, we'll continue to look at a lot more of this kind of stuff from UGA players. By the way, let me give you a prediction. Here's the next thing you're going to hear something about, these NetGator masks. Be really careful about that. Some reporting on the Washington Post on those yesterday. Pay attention to that. Also, Gatorator Updater on the way out the door. 1,383 days. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And on video, boy, a lot in today's show, including the stuff from the Big 12. Connor Riley drops in on us. Let's try to cover all of this now as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. Make sure you check them out. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews for all of that. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Let me go Facebook first. Let me go YouTube first. I do have the Facebook pulled up. I've also started on Facebook the last couple of days. I think once I figured out how to get the old school Facebook interface back up again, I've been excited about that. But let me give the YouTube folks the credit they are due with a chance to begin us for our R.S. Andrews cool down here today. Frank Patterson says, how about the two top SEC teams plus Clemson plus Big 12 champ for the playoff? That's a football series I would obviously watch. One of the things I suspect you could hear more about, though, is like the dirty secret of college football is we think of the college football playoff as about competition, but the college football powers that be don't think of it that way. They think of it as a business, solely a business, generating the most money they possibly can. If they ever go to an 8-team playoff, it's not because it crowns a more legitimate champion. It'll be because it makes them more money. That's just the gross part about the college football playoff, but it is a very real fact about the college football playoff. And with that in mind, given the fact that the current playoff contract has a amount of money expected to be divvied out to the Big Ten, the Pac-12, I think the inability to figure out how you handle all that, do you just stiff them this year because they're not playing? Do you recreate the pie and only split it equally amongst the 3 Power 5 conferences? Because remember, technically the Group of 5 is also a part of this, right? You know, they have a guaranteed spot in a New Year's Six game. They have a chance to make the college football playoff, at least theoretically. How you divvy up the money in all of this, because it took some widespread agreement to even have the playoff. Remember, the Pac-12 would have been fine if there never was a college football playoff. They were already making a lot of money from the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl matters. It matters a great deal out west. It's the reason why for years and years and years, we only had, a voted on national champion from the AP. For a while it was the United Press International. Eventually became the Coaches Bowl. There was no real rush to crown a legitimate national champion because most programs were kind of happy with the bowl system. The Pac-12 especially, the Big Ten probably to a degree as well, but the Pac-12 especially was known as the Pac-10 then. I guess it was maybe even the Pac-8 at one time. But they were very happy with the system because they liked going to the Rose Bowl. They liked the Tournament of Roses parade. That stupid parade makes a big deal out in California for whatever reason. So it took some real finagling to get a lot of people around college football, the Group of 5 teams who suspected they'd be left out in the cold, the Pac-12 who had a nice arrangement with the Rose Bowl. It took some real finagling to get these various entities to even agree to be a part of a college football playoff. So it's always been kind of a tenuous relationship. I could suspect that you could see some real bickering if a playoff took place this year under the auspices of a college football playoff. That doesn't mean you couldn't have kind of a one-off bowl game. You could still crown a national champion with something that felt like a playoff, but it just couldn't be the college football playoff. I mean, at least theorizing. I could end up being wrong about that, but that's part of my theory. Frank Patterson says he thinks that Justin Fields would go to Florida before he would come back to UGA, I bet. So, a couple of things on that front. I think the overwhelming, and by overwhelming I mean like 99.99999% likelihood, is that Justin Fields just goes and gets ready for the NFL draft. I think, I think you'd start over on a brand new team in a brand new situation from scratch. That's a lot different than, hey, I've been with these same teammates, learning this system, being a part of this. Given that Ohio State was like, preseason number 2 in the Coaches Bowl, almost anywhere else you could go, assuming it's not back to a place like Georgia, is going to be a step down in terms of the talent you're going to be playing with. I could see Fields not all that motivated to want to do anything like that and just go get ready for the NFL draft. If I had to guess, that's probably what he would do. I have a sneaking suspicion about something, and this is not based on anything but my own sneaking suspicion. I don't think Fields looks at Georgia as negatively as some of y'all might think that he does. I could be wrong about that. I have a sneaking suspicion he might not quite view the University of Georgia quite as negatively as you might think. I mean, after all, his sister continued to play softball at Georgia even after he left. I mean, that's always an important thing to bring up in a discussion like this. I don't believe that Fields would come back to Georgia, but the idea that that he hates Georgia or something like that, I've always sort of suspected that might not be true. I've always suspected that. Let's see what else. By the way, good to see Green Soldier. I feel like we don't see Green Soldier as much anymore. I know he said he's been busy, cracking heads out there in the world, but I'm glad to see him back here. pray to pest management. Frank Gore said that LSU shows up once every 10 years. It is going to be – listen, we have a lot of LSU fans in our YouTube comment section. We kind of always have. So I love interacting with LSU fans. And I thought last year's LSU team was great. But, this is a team that has had multiple SEC losses in most of the recent years with the exception of 2019. Was 2019 the start of a new normal for them, or was that the aberration? And this kind of goes back to feeling a little bit more like an LSU team we've come to expect in the years before that. I obviously have my suspicions that this is not going to be a great year for LSU. LSU fans feel differently, but that's what makes the season fun, assuming we get a chance to do it. Scott Harris says, will the NCAA allow immediate transfers? I think your bigger problem on that is that, listen, not everybody's like Georgia where you have 89 scholarship players. At least that's one of the 88, 89, something along those lines. Maybe it's down to 88 after the Devon Wilson transfer. You can never be 100% sure about where Georgia's scholarship count truly is. The point is not everyone is like redlining the scholarship number at all times, but most rosters are more full than not. So if you have this widespread number of Big 10 players, Pac-12 players looking for the chance to go play somewhere else, they're not all going to find a place to play. So their issue is not the NCAA. Frankly, we're getting pretty close to, I think, a program just sort of defying the NCAA anyway. I think you could even see this with like Nebraska says, the Big Ten commissioner told Nebraska, if you want to be a part of the Big Ten, you can't go play a game somewhere else this year. Could we see a school like Nebraska just defy that and say, well, try to stop us, or holding scrimmages inside, was it Memorial Stadium? Is that the name of the stadium in Lincoln? Just outright defying the leadership. And yeah, you could see that from an NCAA standpoint there as well of, you say that this person can't transfer, but in a year like this where it's all basically the Wild West, what are you going to do about it? You say that Luke Ford, in a typical year doesn't have immediate eligibility if he transferred in a year like this. Just try to stop us. He's playing, try to stop us. What are you going to do about it? We may see just some open defiance of the NCAA at a certain point in time. But one of the main issues is going to be for programs that just don't have any room for you. Now, listen, for a player who's good enough, things have a way of kind of working out. But it's not like the average program just has, just like oodles and oodles of space to take on somebody. Nicholas King says it was a disgrace the way that Luke Ford was treated, and it was. It was. Let me read this comment. I think this is going to have a good one. So Chuck Pearson says, I don't want transfers. I want to watch the product Kirby has put together and watch that defense dominate. The talent we have is crazy. I actually think there's something to be said about this. I'm not saying that I wouldn't be interested in a transfer, especially if it's on the offensive side of the ball. But for the most part, there is something about this is the team that we thought Georgia was going to be going to bat with as it is. So let's go out and see how good this team is, and at least in comparison to SEC competition. And if all you have this season is an SEC champion, that's fine with me. I've always been of the belief that the SEC championship in and of itself is a prize to cherish. So if that's all you have this year, then I'll take that. But Chuck's point about, too many transfers robs you of the chance of seeing how good this team was going to be to begin with. I think there's something to be said for that being true. Michael Webb says, here's a college football playoff solution. No play, no pay. In other words, if you're not going to play this year, you don't get paid out from the playoff. That seems fair to you. That seems fair to me. I think common sense would say that is fair. But a lot of these university presidents seem to have been absent the day that God was passing out common sense. Matt Rukavina says, BA always beware of the law of unintended consequences. The Pac-12 and Big Ten may have dug themselves in a huge hole with recruits and image. I think this is true. I do. And I don't think the SEC should slow down in terms of putting more distance between itself and these other leagues. I don't. Apart from the virus, which we assume is kind of a short-term thing that our society is dealing with, apart from that, the competition is ongoing. And this is a chance for the SEC to put further distance in its lead, in the gap between it and the rest of college football. And I think you should take every advantage to try to do that. I do. I mean, think about the financial resources the SEC could take in for itself this year that the other leagues won't have, because, TV ain't knocking on the Big Ten's door right now with a check. Pac-12 either. They're not getting that stuff. But the SEC has a chance to. So you get the financial resources associated with all of this. And as you said, from a recruiting standpoint, the potential branding that comes from that of, hey, I saw the SEC stand by its players, not only giving them a chance to play, but also putting reputations on the line. The sports scientists, your career is done if you get this wrong. They're putting their reputations on the line to do it in a healthy and safe way. If I'm a parent of a future recruit, I'm absolutely paying attention to this. I wrote about this in my Justin Fields column yesterday at DawgNation.com. I wouldn't trust the Big Ten anymore. When presidents treat their own interests so differently than the interests of the players who are on their campuses, how could you ever trust that again? I wouldn't trust the Big Ten. I'd think twice before ever going into that conference in a COVID year or not. Pac-12, much the same way. Pac-12 clearly values other things, and by other things, I don't mean academics here. They are interested in some things that just don't matter all that much to the average recruit, I don't believe. So yeah, you better believe I'd be paying very close attention to that. I think that's a really good point, Matt. Sam Hazeltine says, just beat Clemson. It is true. It's like, I know Steve Spurrier kind of joked about this. I was going to mention this during the show and just kind of ran out of time. He joked to Pat Dooley, the longtime reporter for the Gainesville Sun, that, listen, the national champion is either going to be Clemson or the SEC anyway, so just have the winner of the ACC play the winner of the SEC. That's enough of a national champion right there. Gary Holt says, no football, BA, does that mean you're going in the portal? No. We're not going anywhere. The one thing I am steadfastly confident in is that no matter what life throws at us, we're going to find a way to win. Just give us the rules. We're going to find a way to serve people. We're going to find a way to take care of our sponsors. We're going to find a way to do right by the people who come to Dog Nation. I am as confident and as enthusiastic and as optimistic as I've ever been. I believe Georgia's playing football this fall. Even if they don't, we'll find a way to win. I don't know what that is right now. I really don't, but we'll find a way. I have zero doubt in that whatsoever. I will, as a fan of the sport, I will shed tears. As a person who has a job to do to take care of people and entertain them and give them a place to congregate together, I am steadfastly confident we're going to take care of people on that. David Johnston, thanks for checking in. Let's see what else. Jacob O'Neill checking out. We appreciate you being here. Nick Vernon, I'm not going there. Zinty Allen, but Zinty's got his game face on. He's like, the time to go flip these commits is now. Go around and start taking them. I believe that's probably about to heat up. Our buddy Santiago D. Arn checking in. He's hopping out of the broadcast now, but thanks for being here. Good to see Miriam here today, too. I'm glad to see Miriam Martin Corbin. I know she's been busy as of late, but it's nice to see her. Michael Ward says it's basically conferences trying to see who's gonna cancel last. I would almost say the opposite was true. I think that the Big Ten seemed to think there was some value in being the first, because I think that some of the less humble members of that league thought that they could strong arm others into following, and it just didn't work. Even if we're not going to have a full college football season this year and eventually it becomes untenable to have any kind of season, the Big Ten misread the room. It misread the feelings of its coaches and players. It misread the feeling of the rest of college football. It didn't think it would be called into question for why it was choosing to cancel, but it's going to be. There are going to be some people who are going to want to know facts, figures, and specifics about why they determined it was too unsafe to play. People are going to want to know that. The Big Ten has lost this argument for now. A couple more. George Herndon, good to see you today. Frank Patterson says, who do you guys think wins the Big 12 now, Texas or Oklahoma? I've been high on Texas for a while. I've been fairly high on Texas. Stacy Goebel, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Nathan Morris says, if there is a playoff this year, whoever wins it will be discredited. I don't believe that's true. here's the thing. People get to choose what to believe. And just because someone from Big Ten land or Pac-12 land says, oh, this is not a legitimate national championship, you get to choose what you believe and what you don't. And for anyone who says that, I'll be more than happy to tell them, your opinion means nothing to me. If someone in Columbus, Ohio, or Ann Arbor, Michigan, or State College, Pennsylvania says, it's not a real national championship because we didn't play, I will look them in the eye and I will say, your opinion means nothing to me. You don't get to decide. You chose to sit this one out. Now, you didn't choose, but your league chose. So you don't get to be a part of this chapter of college football history. Those that contributed to it get to write it. And that's the way it is. Nathan Morris says, but that's what people will say that it was. You're exactly right about that. People are going to say what they're going to say. But we all get to choose what to believe. Look at Huck Finn. Huck Finn has taken his trolldom up to another level now. He now says the 2021 season's also going to be canceled. So if you want to know why it's a good day for the college football folks, even some of the folks who've been trolling that the season won't take place and now had to up the ante and say the 2021 season will also be postponed as well. And I'm sure that if the Big Ten did that, they'd still be calling it a postponement. Maybe at one point in time, the Big Ten will just try to play 3 seasons in 1 year to make up for all of this. All right, we got to get ready to go. Huge thanks to everybody for being a part of all of this. Shelton Tucker says we should bring Justin Fields on the show. That's not a bad idea. I wonder if Justin would be interested in talking. Anyway, it's good to have all of you with us. Thanks for being here. R.S. Andrews Cool Down, by the way. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews for all of that. Water heater goes out. In many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. Let me also give a shout out to my friends at Kroger. They bring Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, to you tonight. They also bring the start of school to you for many folks around the metro Atlanta area there as well. The lunches that you get, the supplies that you need. Teachers, today's Wednesday. That means big savings for you. That's an ongoing campaign that Kroger has. Big savings at your local Kroger. So check out Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger tonight, 6 p.m. on the DawgNation video channels. Really good stuff with Jeff Sintel. I've also heard a little bit of a rumor that maybe next week's edition of that show could also have another very big guest. So that is on the way here. What else? Oh, AJC, Atlanta News Now, AJC.com. I mentioned this before. Ronald Acuna did not play last night for the Braves, so let's figure out what's going on with that. What else is going on in your world, AJC.com, that you need to be aware of? So in terms of what more of the Big Ten stuff, the Pac-12 cancellations, you can follow all of that at AJC.com there as well. And ways to keep yourself entertained during the pandemic. Really good story on that, too. It's Atlanta News Now at AJC.com. Make sure you check that out there online. Huge thanks to you. For those of you who will be with us tonight for Inside the Huddle, I look forward to seeing you on that. And back here tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. We'll talk to you then, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.